I've never gotten a bass drop intro before. That's awesome. That's new. Love that. Well, good morning, everyone. It is so awesome to be here with you guys this morning. I'm the kids pastor here. My name's Marissa. Because I'm the kids pastor, there definitely will be some sermon illustrations today, so get ready. Well, we are continuing our series on King Solomon, and Amanda talked over last week about how King Solomon was appointed as king over Jerusalem by his father, King David, and today we are going to look at the beginning choices that King Solomon made in his early reign over Jerusalem. Now, I have a question for you guys. It would not be a sermon from Marissa if she doesn't ask you a question. Have you ever ignored really good advice and immediately regretted it? Well, I think back to a time in my life when I was in 5th grade. Now, I grew up over in Bremerton, which is along the Puget Sound. And for school, for 5th graders, we got to go to a camp called Camp Seymour. This was like our last hurrah before we went into 6th grade. There was tons of fun stuff there. There was like horseback riding, archery. The thing that I was most excited for was canoeing. You know, I grew up on the Puget Sound, but I never, ever got to go canoeing. So when it was our group's turn to go to our activities, I chose canoeing. Now, I was with 2 other girls, so we were a group of 3 friends, and we show up and we're waiting to get on the canoe, and then the instructor comes over and she's explaining all the rules to us, and she says, but only 2 people can go on the canoe. So I look at my friends and they immediately grab each other and I'm like, okay, I'm by myself. But you know what? That was not going to stop me. I was going to go. But then the instructor said, you cannot go alone. So I'm sitting here like, okay, we can't go alone. Well, she's describing that today the Puget Sound is it's rushing like wildfire. It's going fast. And so, it was super overcast, so there wasn't tons of water, but it was going crazy, but it didn't look bad. It was sunny. It was beautiful. So the instructor, I don't know why she did this, but she actually left, and it was just me and these 2 girls. And what did I do? I went by myself. I got in that canoe, and I was having the best time of my life. I was like, it's so sunny. It's beautiful. I'm having the best time. And then all of a sudden, I hear this rushing water, and my oar is taken away from me, and I am just floating for an hour, alone, scared, terrified. And finally, I hit a bank of mud, and I wait for another hour. Mind you, a 5th grade girl is alone somewhere out on the water. No one knows for 2 hours, and so the instructor comes by, and she's in this big motorboat, and she looks so angry. But I get on the boat, and you know what? I realized in that moment that the instructor who had known the waters, who had known the lay of the land, told me to not go alone. But I did anyways. I trusted what I thought was best rather than what the instructor who had the knowledge knew what was best. I lacked the perspective of trusting what she was saying. As I drifted away for 2 hours alone down the Puget Sound, this makes me think that drifting doesn't require effort. It's easy to drift. You don't have to try to do it. You just have to stop listening. And it's easy for us to drift, but that means that our need for wisdom is even greater. Now, Amanda talked last week about Solomon's rise to power and how he eliminated all of his external enemies, but in the long run, neglected to guard his heart. Now, we are jumping into chapter 3. Amanda referenced it a little bit, but we're going to read the passages specifically just to give a refresher of the context of what's taking place in the story. So if you have your Bibles, feel free to open them to 1 Kings 3. We're going to read through 1 through 3. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. You can use our screen up here. So Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and married one of his daughters. He brought her to live in the city of David until he could finish building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around the city. Now at that time, the people of Israel sacrificed their offerings at local places of worship, for a temple honoring the name of the Lord had not been built yet. Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship. Now, to give context, again, Amanda brought this up as well, but Solomon had one wife when he became king. But over the course of his life, he had over 500 by the time he died. Now, I know you might think like, wow, okay, King Solomon was crazy. I mean, a little bit, yeah. But here's the specific reason, and as we see in the context of where we're reading, King Solomon arranged these marriages for political reasons. So on the surface, this was incredibly strategic because when someone married a daughter from another country, they were aligned. They were alliances. We're good, right? But by marrying Pharaoh's daughter, Solomon broke 2 Mosaic laws. Now it's referenced in Deuteronomy 7:3. It says to not marry someone of non-Jewish religion. Now, this goes into being unequally yoked, right? So it says, like, when you marry someone, you are married to their life. You adapt their cultures, you adapt to their habits. And not only was King Solomon marrying someone who was not Jewish, but he was marrying someone who had different beliefs, followed different gods. And so this is where we see the drifting in his life happening gradually, slowly. He's letting this influence in. Now, the challenge that King Solomon is facing is this little compromise. He starts to ask himself, I'm not sure that was the right thing to do. But as we read more, everything starts to go great afterwards this moment. So in verse 4 and 5, here is what happens. So the most important of these places of worship was at Gibeon. So the king went there and sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." So God is going to Solomon in a dream, and God asks him, what is the one thing I can give you? You can ask for anything, and it will be yours. What would you guys ask for? Would it be power, fame, wealth, a 5-layer beefy nacho burrito from Taco Bell? Now you guys know my order, huh? But what do you think King Solomon asked for? So you notice this. God, who knows everything about us and about King Solomon, asks him a question of, what do you want? Don't you think he might already know what he wants? A God who knows his heart? See, this shows a lot about God's character because God was giving King Solomon an opportunity, a reward for his faith, which is referenced in verse 3 where it's mentioned, Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father. And then we get to the except part. That little part where it says except. But even after except, God still showed up in Solomon's dream to give him an opportunity. Now, as King Solomon is faced with this subtle drifting, he asks God a question. So let's continue to read in verses 6 through 9 what happens. Solomon replied, "You showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father, David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you. And you have continued to show me this great and faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord, my God, you have made me a king. You had made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" Wow, we see a nice contrast. King Solomon is mostly known for what he asks for in chapter 3. Partially because it's likely different than what you and I would have asked for, or what we would have expected him to ask for. Solomon asks for wisdom to lead his people to God. Now, mind you, this conversation is happening in a dream in this moment. And I don't know about you guys, but if someone were to ask me questions in my sleep, it would probably be, I want more sleep, or I just wouldn't say anything, right? So this is all happening in a dream. But here's what's interesting, is that when Solomon asked for wisdom in his sleep, it showed something deeper. This wasn't a calculated move. It was evidence of God's grace shaping his heart. So in these verses highlight Solomon's recognition of God's power and that he needs God's wisdom. That he needs it. He can't do it alone. For who else can govern God's people than God? So Solomon didn't just ask for knowledge. He didn't just ask to be a smart war leader, but he asked for discernment. He asked for discernment to lead God's people well. In verse 9, he says, "Give me an understanding heart." And now, as we're doing word studies and looking at what other translations use for this verbiage, other translations might say, "Give me a listening or a hearing heart." And this ties into discernment. Now, discernment is judging between right and wrong through God's power. It's not on our own power. It's through God. The ability to judge between right and wrong is by God. Now, King Solomon specifically asks for wisdom so that he would not just have knowledge, but discernment, which is putting wisdom into action. Now, James 3:17 says this, "But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere." Now, here comes my illustration part. I promise I'm not going to throw this at anyone. So I have this tomato here. Now, when we are talking about the difference between wisdom and knowledge, it's like this tomato. So wisdom, as we're talking about, wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge. And as we read in James 3 just a moment ago, we know that it is pure, it's peace-loving, and gentle at all times. That's how we know the voice of God in when we are discerning that. So wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge. Knowledge knows that there is a tomato. And knowledge knows that a tomato is a fruit. If you want to get into a debate about that later, I will be out in the lobby. It is a fruit. It has seeds. But wisdom is not putting a tomato into a fruit salad. And discernment is the product of God's wisdom. And discernment would tell you to not throw this at me at the end of this sermon. Now again, discernment is the product of God's wisdom. Solomon, shockingly, asks for wisdom to lead, but also discernment on right and wrong. Now let's see how God replies to this. Now in verse 10, it says, "The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So God replied, 'Because you have asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice and have not asked for a long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart such as no one else has ever had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. And if you follow me and obey my decrees and my commands, as your father David did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon woke up and realized it had all been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, where he sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. Then he invited all of his officials to a great banquet. Wow. I love in verse 10 where it says, God was pleased. Man, how good would you feel if God said he was pleased with you? And he is. He is. But King Solomon sees this interaction in his dream with God. God says, I am not only going to give you wisdom, but I am going to bless you well beyond more than you even asked for, more than you even imagined. I'm going to bless you with wealth and honor, and no one is going to be equal to you in your ruling. Now, God's reiteration of this promise to Solomon is reiterating the promise that he made to David. Now, we see this in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever. This means that David's lineage would rule. Now, Jesus came from the line of David, and so God was keeping his promise to David by saying, I will continue your line, that your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever. God is saying this to King David, and that his promise is true. So when it talks about when God is reiterating the promise to Solomon, where he says, if you obey, that I will bless you, he is reiterating the promise that he made to David as well. And we'll dive more into this. So many times throughout the book of 1 Kings, God references King David as an example of a man who followed the Lord completely. But Solomon, for Solomon, it is stated as conditional. If you obey me, life will be long. Now, God is giving Solomon a choice. If Solomon follows God's wisdom, he will live a long life. God's promise for us are always good. And he sees our hearts, he sees our struggles, he sees our steps before we even take them. Now, God was always offering wisdom to King Solomon. This also means that Solomon had the choice in every decision he was making when he was ruling to choose wisdom. He had the choice to choose wisdom of godly wisdom or what he thought was best for his kingdom. Now, God states this condition because he knows the dangers ahead that Solomon will face. And we'll get to see that as we continue our series. But God knew Solomon's heart, and he loves him. He knew the dangers that he would face with these small compromises that he was making in the passage of marrying Pharaoh's daughter and continuing that cycle. But God, here's what he does. He still blesses him. He still blesses him. Now, this was not a condition of God's love. It was a call to obedience. This was not a condition of God's love, but it was trusting in the wisdom God had given Solomon. In 1 Kings 3 highlights the defining moment of King Solomon gaining wisdom, for which his choices in the next chapters flow from. You'll see in the next few chapters how Solomon uses the wisdom to build the kingdom of Jerusalem for God. His role was specific in 3 ways. So he led armies, he administrated government, and he judged interpersonal connections. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I would want someone following God and listening to the wisdom of that. And people recognized Solomon for that. People from so many other countries came to Solomon and knew him as the man after, or not the man after God's heart, someone else, the man who was relying on God's wisdom and leading his people. Now, wisdom from God through the decisions he made as a leader was known worldwide. And although later in the next chapter, there are some holes in King Solomon's techniques where he does not choose to listen to God's wisdom, the main theme that's highlighted throughout this chapter is we can ask God for wisdom. That we can trust that when we ask God for wisdom, he listens and he gives it. Now, James 1 verses 5-6 say this. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. See, asking for wisdom starts with surrender. It's accepting that we don't have all the answers. But it's also accepting that we can trust that we follow the one true God who is generous and loves us. Now, not only do we see how God shows King Solomon this, but Jesus sets the example of what it looks like to have wisdom, which is the ability to apply godly knowledge. Now, how did Jesus live wisdom out? There are so many stories, and even me asking that question, you might think of some parables that pop into your head. You might think of when he was asking God, or when the devil was tempting him, that he was reciting verses back of, no, this is truth. Those are all great examples. Now, specifically when I ask myself that question of how does Jesus live wisdom out, I do go to the parables, and I look and see that Jesus lives out wisdom through asking a lot of questions. He listens and often doesn't answer the question being asked, but the more important question behind it. Now, in Matthew 13, we see the parable of the farmer scattering seed. Now, Jesus is sitting down with his disciples, and he's telling his disciples about a farmer scattering seeds, and the seeds fall on 4 different types of soil. Now, one part of soil, the birds ate the seed, and it didn't get to grow. Another seed landed on shallow land, and it was burnt by the sun. Another seed fell into thorns, and another fell on fertile soil. And as he is talking about this parable, the disciples literally ask Jesus, "Why are you telling us so many parables? Why don't you just tell us the answer?" And in his response, we see in Matthew 13:12, this is not on a slide, so I'm just going to read it for you guys. To those who listen to my teaching, more understanding will be given, and they will have an abundance of knowledge. But for those who are not listening, even what little understanding they have will be taken away from them. Now he says, listen to my teachings, and you will gain wisdom. He's not just saying, jump rope 5 times and then you'll have wisdom. No, he's saying, have a relationship with me. Listen to my teachings, get into the word, know me, and I will provide that for you. And here's the thing is he already goes before us, and he has already provided us with wisdom. All we have to do is step out and ask. The methods of the parable show Jesus' character. Not only are the acts of being slow to speak, like Jesus was, quick to listen, but the acts of Jesus' wisdom caused his disciples to search their own hearts, to go and ask God questions. They even asked Jesus, "Hey, why are you doing this?" But they asked him in openness and relationship with him. Jesus wanted them to search their own hearts, to go out and have that relationship with him. And God was also providing the same opportunity for King Solomon daily. He went to him in a dream. He did not have to do that, but that shows that he wanted Solomon to lead in wisdom. And he gave that to him and so much more. Now, I can relate to this story in the sense of reaching out and asking God for wisdom in a specific part of my life. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the term or heard the saying of our strengths are our own weaknesses. For those of you that know me, I love to encourage people. And I can just get creative. I'm like, oh, wow, their hair looks really cool in that specific way. Sometimes that's a double-edged sword. Because when I'm angry, I can also get very creative with my words. Don't ask my husband. But here's the thing, is that is a constant battle. And that is an opportunity that I've tried to step out in and ask God, okay, God, give me the words to speak right now, because the words that I have in my own power are not going to be good. And I want my character to represent you. God, help give me the discernment between right and wrong. Should I say this? Should I not? And God has given that to me. And it might not be right away. It might be right in that moment. But sometimes I'll feel this peace of just be still, just be quiet. And honestly, that has helped me a lot. Because when there's times I feel like I need to speak up, but God says, shh, let me speak. And that's wisdom. Now, my question for you guys today is there something specific for you today that you need to bring to God and ask him for his wisdom for? Now, it may not look like leading a whole kingdom like King Solomon did, and it may not look like fame and riches, but we can trust that the wisdom we receive is specifically for us, because the God who loves us knows everything about us. He goes before us. He sees everything that we have done and will do. We can trust him that the wisdom that he provides for us is specifically for us. And there are so many conflicting voices in this world. There's people, even peers, telling you that, hey, do this, do this, do this. But in a world that is just so busy with saying, oh no, like treat yourself or preach your own truth. Like, no, let's preach God's truth. Let's abide in God's wisdom. Jesus prayed. He talked to God, and he literally is God and is the Son of God who was sent on the cross to die for all of us. That is a love that is true and a love that we can trust for wisdom. Now, God didn't give up on King Solomon even when he chose the wrong path. God had a plan to send his son to bring right relationship. Now, God calls us to ask him for wisdom and to rely on him because he loves us and he cares about us. Now, as we reflect on the truth and the wisdom that Jesus provides to us, is there an area or a circumstance that you're going through today that you can take some time to ask God to give you wisdom in? Say, God, help me discern in this. Maybe it's a situation with family. Family challenges can be hard. Or maybe it's a situation at work, or maybe you're wanting to take a next step of leaving one season and going to another season. Like, God, how do I know if this is from you? God, give me wisdom. Or maybe it's in our speech. Maybe there's people in our lives that we are just losing patience with. God, what are you speaking to us today? Now, as we go into a time of worship, I would just encourage you guys to take this moment and just talk to God. Ask him for wisdom in a situation that is just so heavy on your heart. And if you need people to pray with you, we're going to have some team members up here. We would love to pray with you guys. So would you guys stand with us as we go into worship?